All right, here's part one. Part one of South Carolina real estate. We're going through glossary terms, part one. All right, I want to thank the Lord for this opportunity that He's given me to prepare for this exam. Let's go with abstract of title, a summary or digest of all transfers, conveyances, legal proceedings, and any other facts relied on as evidence of title, showing continuity of ownership, together with any other elements of record which may impair title. Acceleration clause, a condition in a real estate finance instrument giving the lender the power to declare all sums owing the lender immediately due and payable upon the happening of an event such as sale of the property or a delinquency in the repayment of the note. Acceptance, the act of agreeing or consenting to the terms of an here offer, thereby establishing the meeting of the minds that is an essential element of a contract. Accession, an addition to property through the efforts of man or by natural forces. Accretion or accretion, accession by natural forces, alluvium. Acknowledgement, a formal declaration made before an authorized person, example, a notary public, by a person who has executed an instrument stating that the execution was his or her free will. Actual eviction, the removal of a tenant by the landlord because the tenant breached a condition of a lease or another rental contract. Actual notice, express or implied knowledge of a fact. Addendum, additional pages of material that are added to and become part of a contract. Adverse possession, a method of acquiring title to real property through possession of the property for a statutory period under certain conditions by a person other than the owner of record. Agency, the relationship between principal and the principal's agent, which arises out of a contract, either expressed or implied, written or oral, when the agent is employed by the principal to do certain acts dealing with a third party. Agent, one who acts for and with authority from another, called the principal. Agreement of sale, a written agreement or contract between seller and purchaser in which they reach a meeting of minds on the terms and conditions of the sale. The parties concur or in harmonious opinion. Air rights, the rights in real property to the reasonable use of the airspace above the surface of the land. Alienation clause, a clause in a contract giving the lender certain rights in the event of a sale or other transfer of a mortgage property. Alluvium, the gradual increase of the earth on a shore of an ocean or bank of a stream resulting from the action of the water. Amortization, the liquidation of a financial obligation of an installment basis, on an installment basis. Amortized loan, a loan to be repaid, interest and principal, by a series of regular payments that are equal or nearly equal without any special balloon payment prior to maturity. Amperage, a unit measure of electricity. Appraisal, an estimate of the value of property resulting from an analysis of facts about the property and opinion of value. Appraiser, one qualified by education, training, and experience who is hired to estimate the value of real and personal property based on experience, judgment, facts, and use of formal appraisal process. Appreciation, monetary gain resulting from the increase in the market value of an instrument, excluding additions of capital. For example, a house which is sold 5 years after it was purchased for 20% more than the purchase price. Asbestos, a naturally occurring mineral fiber sometimes found in older homes. It is hazardous to health when a possibility exists of exposure to inhalable fibers. Homeowners should be alert for friable asbestos and always seek professional advice in dealing with it. Asbestosis, a chronic lung disease caused by inhaling asbestos fibers. Assessed value, a valuation placed upon a piece of property by a public authority as a basis of levying taxes of the property. Assignment, the transfer to another of any property in possession or in action or of any estate or right therein, a transfer by a person of that person's rights under a contract. Assignment of rents, a provision in a mortgage or deed of trust under which the lender may, upon default by the trustor, take possession of the property, collect income from the property, and apply it to the loan balance and the costs incurred by the lender. Assumption of mortgage, The taking of a title to property by a grantee, wherein the grantee assumes liability for payment of an existing note secured by a mortgage or deed of trust against a property, becoming a co-guarantor for the payment of a mortgage or deed of trust note. Avulsion, a sudden and perceptible loss of land by the action of water as by a sudden change in the course of a river. Bargain and sale deed, any deed that recites a consideration and purpose to convey the real estate. A bargain and sale deed with a covenant against the grantor's act is one in which the grantor warrants that grantor has done nothing to harm or cloud the title. Base and meridian, imaginary lines used by surveyors to find and describe the location of private or public lands. In government surveys, a baseline runs due east and west. Meridians run due north and south and are used to establish township boundaries. Basement, one or more floors of a building that are either completely or partially below the ground floor. Beam, a horizontal structural member that supports a floor. Beams are typically wood, cold formed metal, framing, or steel. Bearing walls, structural walls that transfer building loads down to the foundation. Joists, beams, and roofs are typically supported by bearing walls. Beneficiary, the lender on the security of a note and deed of trust. Bilateral contract, a contract in which each party promises to do something. Blanket mortgage, a type of loan used to fund the purchase of more than one piece of real property. A blanket mortgage is often used for subdivision financing. Blockbusting, the practice on the part of unscrupulous speculators or real estate agents of including panic selling of homes at prices below market value, especially by exploiting the prejudices of property owners in neighborhoods in which the racial makeup is changing or appears to be on the verge of changing. Blueprint, architectural drawings that describe the layout and construction of a house. British Thermal Unit, BTU, the amount of heat energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. This is a standard measurement used to state the amount of energy that a fuel has as well as the amount of output of any heat generating device. Building code, a systematic regulation of construction of buildings within a municipality established by ordinance or law. Building envelope. A building envelope is the maximum three-dimensional space on a zoning lot within which a structure can be built as permitted by applicable height, setback, and yard controls. One of the main goals of a zoning analysis is to determine the building envelope. A building envelope is also referred to as the bulk of a building. Bundle of rights. All of the legal rights incident to ownership of property, including real rights of use, possession, encumbering, and disposition. Buy down, obtaining a lower interest rate by paying additional points to the lender. Buyer agent, an agent who represents the buyer in a real estate transaction. Capital gains, at resale of a capital item, the amount by which the net sale proceeds exceed the adjusted cost basis book value. Used for income tax computations. Gains are called short or long based upon the length of the holding period after acquisition, usually taxed at lower rates than ordinary incomes. Capitalization rate, the rate of interest, which is considered a reasonable return on the investment and used in the process of determining value based upon net income. Capitalization rate equals net operating income divided by purchase price. Certificate of occupancy, a document issued by a local government agency after satisfactory inspection of a structure authorizing that the structure can be occupied. Certificate of title, a written opinion by an attorney that ownership of a particular parcel of land is as stated in the certificate. Chain of title, a history of conveyances and encumbrances affecting the title from the time the original patent was granted or as far back as records are available, used to determine how title came to be vested in current owner. Chattel, goods or every species of property, movable or immovable, which are not real property, personal property. Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, a fluid containing hydrocarbons that absorb heat from a reservoir at low temperature and reject heat at higher temperatures. When emitted into the atmosphere, CFCs cause depletion of the stratospheric ozone layer. Circuit breaker, the safety valves for electrical systems. It interrupts an electric circuit when an unusual condition arises, such as lightning and malfunctional appliances. Unlike a fuse, it can be reset. Closing, process by which all the parties to a real estate transaction conclude the details of a sale or mortgage. The process includes the signing and transfer of documents and distribution of funds. Cloud on title, a claim, encumbrance, or condition which impairs the title to real property until disproved or eliminated, as for example, through a quit claim deed or quiet title legal action. Commingling, the illegal mixing of personal funds with money held in trust on behalf of a client. Commission, an agent's compensation for performing the duties of agency in real estate practice, a percentage of the selling price of property, percentage of rentals, etc. Common elements refers to the spaces in a building shared by residents of the building. These include lobbies, corridors, stairs, elevators, etc. Community property, property acquired by husband and or wife during a mortgage when not acquired as the separate property of either spouse. Each spouse has equal rights of management, alienation, and testamentary disposition of community property. Comparative market analysis, an analysis of the competition in the marketplace that a property will face upon sale attempts. Condemnation, the act of taking private property for public use by a political subdivision upon payment to owner of just compensation. Condominium, an estate in real property wherein there is an undivided interest in common in a portion of real property coupled with a separate interest in space called a unit, the boundaries of which are described on a recorded final map, parcel map, or condominium plan. Confidentiality. The confidentiality. An agent is obligated to safeguard his or her principal's lawful confidences and secrets. Therefore, a real estate broker must keep confidential any information that may weaken a principal's bargaining position. The duty of confidentiality precludes a broker who represents a seller from disclosing to a buyer that the seller can or must sell a property below the listed price. Conversely, a broker who represents a buyer is prohibited from disclosing to a seller that the buyer can or will pay more than what has been offered for a property. The duty of confidentiality does not include an obligation by a broker who represents a seller to withhold known material facts about the condition of the seller's property from the buyer or to misrepresent the property's condition. To do so constitutes misrepresentation and may impose liability on both the broker and or the seller. Consideration. Anything given or promised by a party to induce another to enter into a contract, money, or personal services. Construction loan, a loan secured by real estate which is for the purpose of funding the construction of improvements or buildings upon the property. Constructive eviction, any disturbance of the tenant's possession of the leased premises by the landlord whereby the premises are rendered unfit or unsuitable for the purpose for which they were leased. Constructive notice. Notice of the condition of title to real property given by the official records of a government entity which does not require actual knowledge of the information. Contract. An agreement to do or not to do a certain thing. Conventional loan. A mortgage securing a loan made by investors without governmental underwriting, for example, which is not FHA insured or VA guaranteed. This type of loan is customarily made by a bank or savings and loan association. Conversion. The unlawful appropriation of another's property as in the conversion of trust funds. Cooperative. An apartment building owned by a corporation and in which tenancy in an apartment unit is obtained by purchase of shares of stock of the corporation and where the owner of such shares is entitled to occupy a specific apartment in the building. Corporation, an entity established and treated by law as an individual or unit with rights and liabilities or both, distinct and apart from those of the persons composing it. A corporation is a creature of having certain powers and duties of a natural person. Being created by law, it may continue for any length of time the law prescribes. Cost approach, an analysis in which a value estimate of a property is derived by estimating the replacement cost of the improvements, deducting therefrom the estimated accrued depreciation, then adding the market value of the land. Counteroffer, a response to an offer to enter into a contract, changing some of the terms of the original offer. A counteroffer is a rejection of the offer, not a form of acceptance, and does not create a binding contract unless accepted by the original offerer. Covenant, conditions, and restrictions. CC and Rs. The basic rules establishing the rights and obligations of owners of real property within a subdivision or other tract of land in relation to other owners within the same subdivision or tract, and in relation to an association of owners organized for the purpose of operating and maintaining property commonly owned by the individual owners. Crawl space, shallow space between the underside of the first floor of a house and the ground. Credit, a bookkeeping entry on the right side of an account recording the reduction or elimination of an asset or an expense, or the creation of or addition to a liability or item of equity or revenue. Debit, that which is due from one person to another. Deed, a written instrument which, when properly executed and delivered, conveys title to real property from one person, grantor, to another, grantee. Deed in lieu of foreclosure. A deed to real property accepted by a lender from a defaulting borrower to avoid the necessity of foreclosure proceedings by the lender. Deed restrictions. Limitations in the deed to a property that dictate certain uses that may or may not be made of the property. Default. Failure to fulfill a duty or promise or to discharge an obligation. Defeasance clause. The clause in a mortgage that gives the mortgager the right to redeem the mortgager's property upon the payment of the mortgager's obligations to the mortgagee. Deficiency judgment. A judgment given by a court when the value of a security pledged for a loan is insufficient to pay off the debt of the defaulting borrower. Demand. The supply of willing and able buyers in the marketplace or lack thereof. Devise, a gift or disposal of real property by last will and testament. Devisee, one who receives a gift or real property by will. Divisor, one who disposes of real property by will. Discount points, the amount of money the borrower or seller must pay the lender to get a mortgage at a stated interest rate. Dominant tenement, a parcel of real property that has an easement over another piece of property, the servient estate. Dual agency, an agency relationship in which the agent acts concurrently for both of the principals in a transaction. Easement, a right, privilege, or interest limited to a specific purpose which one party has in the land of another. Easement appurtenant, an easement that benefits the dominant estate and runs with the land. In other words, an easement appurtenant generally transfer automatically when the dominant estate is transferred. Easement by condemnation, an easement created by the government or government agency that has exercised its right under eminent domain. Easement by grant, the creation of an easement by one party expressing transferring the easement to another party. Easement by implication, an easement that is not created by express statements between the parties, but as a result of surrounding circumstances that dictate that an easement must have been intended by the parties. Easement by necessity, parcels without access to a public way may have an easement of access over adjacent land if crossing that land is absolutely necessary to reach the landlocked parcel, and there has been some original intent to provide the lot with access. Easement by prescription. Implied easements granted after the dominant estate has used the property in a hostile, continuous, and open manner for a statutory prescribed number of years. Easement in gross. An easement that benefits an individual or legal entity rather than a dominant estate. Eave. The section of the roof that overhangs the walls of a house. Implements. The crops and other annual plantings considered to be personal property of the cultivator. Eminent domain. The rights of the government to acquire property for necessary public or quasi-public use by condition. The owner must be fairly compensated. Encroachment. An unlawful intrusion into another's adjacent property by improvements to real property. For example, a swimming pool built across a property line. Encumbrance. Anything which affects or limits the fee simple title to or value of property. Example, mortgages or easements. Equitable lien. A lien on property imposed by a court in order to achieve fairness, particularly when someone has possession of property which he or she holds for another. Erosion. The wearing away of land by the act of water, wind, or glacial ice. Escalation. The right reserved by the lender to increase the amount of the payments and or interest upon the happening of a certain event. Escheat. The reverting of property to the state when heirs capable of inheriting are lacking. Estate at sufferance. An estate arising when the tenant wrongfully holds over after the expiration of the term. The landlord has the choice of evicting the tenant as a trespasser or accepting such tenant for a similar term and under the condition of the tenant's previous holding, also called a tenancy at sufferance. Estate at will, the occupation of lands and tenements by a tenant for an indefinite period, terminable by one or both parties. Estate for years, an interest in lands by virtue of a contract contract for the possession of them for a definite and limited period of time, may be for a year or less. A lease may be said to be an estate for years. Ethics, moral principle that governs a person's or group's behavior. Exclusive agency listing, a listing agreement employing a broker as the sole agent for the seller of real property under the terms of which the broker is entitled to a commission if the property is sold through any other broker, but not if a sale is negotiated by the owner without the services of an agent. Exclusive rights to sell agreement. A listing agreement employing a broker to act as agent for the seller of real property under the terms of which the broker is entitled to a commission if the property is sold during the duration of the listing through another broker or by the owner without the services of an agent. Executed contract. Executed contract, a contract in which both parties have completely performed their contractual obligation. Executory contract, a contract in which one or both parties have not yet completed performances of their obligations. Express agency, an agency relationship created by oral or written agreement between principal and the agent. Express contract, a contract that has been put into words either spoken or written. Fascia, architectural term for a brand running horizontally and situated vertically under a roof edge, or which forms the outer surface of a cornice visible to an observer, typically consisting of a wooden board or sheet metal. Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, FHLMC, Freddie Mac, an independent stock company which creates a secondary market in conventional residential loans and in FHA and VA loans by purchasing mortgages. Federal National Mortgage Association, FNMA, Fannie Mae, a New York Stock Exchange company. It is a public company that operates under a federal charter and is the nation's largest source of financing of home mortgages. Fannie Mae Fannie Mae does not lend money directly to customers, but instead works to ensure that the mortgage funds are available and affordable by purchasing mortgage loans from institutions that lend directly to consumers. Federal Reserve System. The federal banking system of the United States under the control of Central Board of Governors, Federal Reserve Board, involving a central bank in each 12 geographical districts with broad powers in controlling credit and the amount of money in circulation. Fee simple absolute. An inheritable estate in land providing the greatest interest of any form of title. Fee simple determinable. An estate that will end automatically when the state, event, or condition occurs. The interest will revert to the grantor or the heirs of the grantor. Fee simple estate. The greatest interest that one can have in real property. An estate that is unqualified, of indefinite duration, freely transferable, and inheritable. FHA insured loan, a mortgage loan in which payments are insured by the Federal Housing Administration. Fiduciary, a person in a position of trust and confidence as between principal and broker. Broker as fiduciary owes certain loyalty which cannot be breached under the rules of agency. Fiduciary duty, that duty owed by an agent to act in the highest good faith toward the principal and not to obtain any advantage over the latter by the slightest misrepresentation, concealment, duress, or pressure. Fixtures, appurtenances attached to the land or improvements, which usually cannot be removed without agreement as they become real property. Example, plumbing fixtures, store fixtures built into the property, etc. Flashing, sheet metal used at wall and roof junctions and around chimneys to prevent water entry. Floor area ratio, FAR. The floor area ratio, also referred to as FAR, is the principal bulk regulation controlling the size of buildings. FAR is the ratio of total building floor area to the area of the zoning lot. Each zoning district has a FAR control. When multiplied by the lot area of the zoning lot, produces the maximum amount of floor area allowable in a building to the zoning lot. For example, on a 10,000 square foot zoning lot in a district with a maximum FAR of 1.0, the floor area of a building cannot exceed 10,000 square feet. Footing, concrete set in the soil. Foundation bed that support the foundation of the house. Foreclosure, procedure whereby property pledged as security for a debt is sold to pay the debt in event of default in payments or terms. Foundation, the part of the structure, typically below grade, upon which all other construction is built. Freon, moderately toxic gas or liquids which have been typically been used as refrigerants in air conditioning units, for example, and as aerosol propellants. Friable, easily crumbled or reduced to power. Asbestos is an example of a friable substance. Fuse, a device used in electrical systems to protect against excessive current. General agent, an agent with full authority over one property of the principal, such as a property manager. General lien, a lien on all the property of a debtor. Girder, a primary horizontal structural element, typically a deep beam in which smaller joists or beams frame into. Government National Mortgage Association. Jenny Mae, a government-owned corporation